Welcome to the Financial Planning for Canadian Business Owners podcast. You will hear about industry insights with award-winning financial planner and entrepreneur Jason Pereira. Through the interviews with different experts with their stories and advice, you will learn how you can navigate the challenges of being an entrepreneur, plan for success, and make the most of your business and life. And now, your host, Jason Pereira.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. Today on the show, I have Shane Slater, corporate currency specialist for FirmaFX. I brought Shane on the show to talk about foreign exchange and how it impacts business owners and how you can do better than just taking what the bank or your credit card will give you, and how that can materially change your margins sometimes, depending on how bad a rate you were paying before. And with that, here's my interview with Shane. Shane, thanks for taking the time today.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So Shane Slater of FirmaFX, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. Always a lovely opportunity to kind of speak to a bigger mass who kind of unaware of myself and my organization, the kind of services we offer. Basically, I'm a corporate currency specialist, which means we help out SMEs who get exposed to international business and FX dealings in the regular day-to-day business. So basically companies that have revenues in various currencies, US dollars, euros, pounds, Australian dollars, or have expenses perhaps in China spending US dollars, RMB, euros, pounds, that kind of stuff. We basically help them not just process the currency exchange, but also help them with international wires, incoming, and of course, outgoing as well, reducing the margins that the big banks are typically known for, and also providing services and advising when the rates may go in their favor and when there's an opportune time to do an exchange is basically in a nutshell what we do for our clients.
Excellent. So there's a bunch to unpack there. So I brought you on the show to talk about how exchange rates have an impact on a business and how basically the costs of exchange, of making foreign exchange work, and how basically going to someone like yourself can not only help with the immediate needs, but also longer term ones. But before we move forward, I want to dispel one myth. And this is one that I still can't believe exists, but it does. And I got in this argument on Twitter the other day. So basically, when you convert $1 Canadian dollar to 80 cents American or whatever currency we're talking about, that does not mean you lost money. Getting less of one currency in exchange for a full unit of another is not a loss. That is just the exchange rate. What matters is a principle called purchasing power parity. And what that means is that if you can buy for $1 Canadian the same basket of goods that you can buy for 80 cents American, that means that 80 cent exchange rate is a fair exchange rate, because what really matters is what your money can buy. So as long as the exchange rate reflects the difference in prices, you're golden. This is best encapsulated by something known as the Big Mac Index, which compares the Big Mac price across the world. Now, it's not a perfect index, but it's a good little proxy for people to understand this principle. But oftentimes I hear people say that, oh, I'm going to the States, I'm going to lose X amount of dollars because I got to convert. That's not how it works. Now, it's not without cost. And this is where I'm going to go back to you, Shane. So talk to me about the costs associated to the consumer or the business owner when making a currency exchange.
Absolutely. Well, if you example I think you're referring to is basically something that you'll see on a Bank of Canada posted rate is a mid-market rate, whereas the banks and an FX broker like myself, of course, have to make some sort of margin because we're an operational business as well from the buy and the sell rate, similar to a stock or any other item. So the banks typically charging you, if you'll see sometimes there will be a margin between the buy and the sell of about 7%, which is quite extreme.
Sorry, extreme. 7%. There are very few things in life that we pay 7% transaction fees on in this industry. I mean, like, I think about how much people lose their mind over 5% on real estate, 7% on foreign exchange. Okay, so please continue. That was my
Just to clarify though, it's 7% from the buy and the sell, so they're making 3.5% on each direction. Just to be clear, but still, to do a simple transaction as an currency exchange, which isn't labor intensive, there's no material cost to it. It is quite excessive. Whereas, a broker like yourself, you can get well under 1% depending on your volume and a better ease and convenience type situation. So, if you're losing 3.5% on exchange rate, that can be quite substantial based off your volumes. The exchange rate is what it is, but if you're losing 3.5% on hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, that eats away at your profit, and profit that should be going in your pocket to reinvest in your business.
Absolutely. And I've sent some of my clients to you in the past, so there's your endorsement. And it's typically around cases where I've had clients who were moving between countries. They were either moving between countries and taking the proceeds of a home sale and converting them, or some who are compensated in stock in US dollars. And those, for some large tech companies, those resulted in some very large windfalls, right? So don't get me wrong, if we're talking about converting $50, calling you is not worth it. If we're talking about converting small, take the bank, there's also some online challenger bank options like Wise that they will convert. But we start talking about large sums, and I'll let you tell me where the line is for you essentially. And we start talking about 1% starting to equal a material amount of money. You're going to want that kind of service and that kind of like white glove guidance through this and for a better rate. So talk to me about, when we're talking about a single transaction, where does it start to make sense for people to come to someone like you versus just accept the 3.5 either direction spread?
So that's a great question, Jason. It's kind of, I'd say it varies, but on the minimum end, I'd say about $10,000 per transaction is a point where you're going to start saving about $200 to $300 per transaction using a broker like myself, FirmaFX that is, versus kind of the big banks. Also, where the services may be very inconvenient for an SME, where they may have to actually, believe it or not, walk into the bank, speak to the teller, waste 30 minutes out of their day instead of spending their time doing the regular business items. So, $10,000, I say, is around the point where it makes sense for them to save money. Not to say that we won't do transactional sizes smaller than that, because we're happy to help SMEs and help them grow, right? If we're able to save them not just money, but time, they can then put that time back into their business to doing what they do best and help them grow in a multitude of ways.
That's so we're talking. So that when we get to the 5-figure mark, we're starting to look at some material, reasonable money. And $200 to go through to not just accept the normal bank rate quickly. It's not a bad trade-off. So, and of course, the bigger the number gets, the bigger the savings.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, that's the simple stuff. Now, you mentioned something about organizing international wire transfers. So talk to me about the challenge for business owners there and how you help with that.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is the time delay that you'll have for an international wire and even domestic wires as well, believe it or not. How long can it take the banks to process something so simple as a wire into international and domestic? Sometimes, especially, outgoing wires aren't usually too bad, 48 to 70 hours for the bank. We process it depending on the time zone, same day, or if not the next business day. Again, Australia, Europe, it's hard to kind of do the same day because banking hours do change per time zone. But incoming wires, sometimes, besides the fees that the banks, the absurd fees the banks can charge for just receiving a wire, I've seen hundreds of dollars to receive a wire, is the time frame. It can take 48 hours to a week to receive funds, whereas we have positioned internationally bank accounts so that we can receive funds same day. No incoming wire fees, nothing like that. They'll get hit by. So we're going to help you speed the process. So you're not just going to save money on the exchange rate, but you're going to get the funds about 48 hours to a week faster than using your big bank. And of course, we're highly accessible. Pick up the phone and call me. There's no waits. Send me an email like yourself, Jason. We're very, as you've emailed before, we reply back very quickly. The service is our utmost value for clients.
All right. So basically, you can help facilitate with that. And of course, you do better than the individual rates. But let's talk about bigger business issues, right? So there's the one-off transactions, which will happen. But one of the reasons I brought you on was specifically to talk about the concept of currency hedging. So this is a process. Hedging is basically a process where you eliminate risk. So what is the risk business owners face? Well, let's say I'm a Canadian-based company with my expenses in Canada, and I enter into a long-term contract or a couple-year contract to deliver stuff to the US, and my revenue's in US dollars. Well, that's great. That's fine. I got a good business opportunity there. But now I am exposed to the risk of the fluctuations in currency between Canadian and US dollar. If that goes against me, my revenues actually technically drop, and vice versa. If I am basically buying US goods in order to sell in Canada. So that is a business risk. So talk to me about what can be done to mitigate that risk.
First of all, I love the way you phrase that. Risk, using hedging strategy to eliminate risk. And I think some people have this myth, again, that hedging, some businesses consider that gambling, but it's actually the exact opposite. It is to...
The word literally means to prevent risk.
So I'll have the conversation, and some people say, I don't want to gamble. The rates I like to do on spot. And, and that's okay if that's the person's idea. But the general concept is you're exposing yourself to sometimes millions of dollars throughout, a year, 2 years, 3 years on an FX rate. You're budgeting this FX rate for your currency exchange. If it moves outside of a couple cents, again, we do recommend putting some sort of buffer in for yourself because there's some fluctuation. But if you're the rates, for example, have moved the last 2 weeks, they've moved 4.5% in the side of the US dollars versus CAD. The euros have lost 10 cents in the last 2 months. If you're not like mitigating for this risk, you can literally lose all your profits based on FX fluctuation. And so the idea with the hedge is that, you have a forecasted rate. You have a time frame of when you plan to settle these forward contracts or hedging. You can take as many drawdowns as you'd like. We typically sell them as open contracts, meaning you can draw down at any time as many times as you like. There are closed forwards, but those typically aren't the most beneficial and they're not as flexible. So it's a product we do offer, but not necessarily a good fit. And so in combination with that, the idea is to guarantee your price point for at least some of your foreign exchange so that you have a peace of mind of knowing exactly what you're going to pay or exactly what you're going to receive, which allows you to, again, calculate your expenses. It allows you to have peace of mind and not worry about the rates moving 4 cents in a week. And how does that impact your business? Because these are things we unfortunately cannot control and can be sometimes extremely hard to predict. Bank forecasts change every month dramatically, as you can see, look at some reports.
Well, and especially if you're a tight margin business, right? We always pick on grocery as an example, right? 2% margins in the end, 2% margin, a slight currency move could wipe out all profitability, right? And
absolutely.
Of course, you can adjust prices at time of sale, but at least in that business, but some businesses, you've locked in to deliver at a certain point and it contractually. So that can be highly, highly dangerous. So talk to me about how the conversation starts with businesses who have these types of contracts. How do you assess their need? How do you basically work with them to figure out how much they should be hedging? What is it and then what kind of strategies do you put in place in order to hedge that risk?
Yeah, great question. And I can just quickly rewind. I love the point you put about the cost of goods and kind of changing that. But also keep in mind when you do that, that could potentially put a strain on your relationship with that client. So that's another reason why, yes, you can do it. But at a certain point, are we potentially going to lose future business because we didn't hedge in advance and now we're raising prices on them? They may not like that. Let's just start off there. But yeah, so hedging strategies, I would say, change depending on every single client. And again, important things are, like you mentioned before, what are your what are your actual margins? If you're a tight margin business, I would highly recommend hedging a good portion of your FX because you are going to live or die by the FX rate moving up or down. And it doesn't feel good to lose money when you're doing a great job, but the rates move against you. On a higher margin companies, maybe a little less FX, maybe doing 50% and doing a cost per average strategy as rates go in or in their favor or against them. So doing cost per average, doing in chunks, rates that they're happy with and make sense in their books and are budgeted correctly. So that, if the rates do go up, the rates do go down, it does happen, but at least you've budgeted accordingly and you're doing cost per average to kind of smooth it out. So there's no extreme volatility in those situations. Well, of course, length of contract matters too. Is it 90-day terms of when you expect to get paid? Or is it going to be a year out? If it's a year out, you should probably be hedging a good portion of FX because as we see, the US dollar, CAD, and other currencies as well can move so much within a 1 year period where, back in, you can run back to 2010 when the US dollar CAD was par. If you're a company that sold US dollars and you were budgeting at 120 and then now you're getting at par, you just lost 20% of profit. That's a problem. Yes. So I'd love to, I recommend having a conversation. There's no guideline exactly of do this, do this, do this. It's what are your needs? What are your expectations? How much do you want to do? What's the time frame? What happens if the rates go against you? How does that impact your business type of situation? And somebody like myself can go with that conversation with you and kind of see what the pain points are and see what's best for you at the end of the day.
Effectively, they enter into a contract with you're the broker. They enter a contract where they will exchange X number of dollars in US dollars for X number of Canadian dollars or vice versa at a set rate so that there's no ambiguity.
Absolutely.
Now, there's other ways of hedging. They're natural. I refer to natural hedging as just basically, if you have US dollar expenses and US dollar income, hey, if you know what those are, right? If you have $1 million in income and $750,000 in expenses, and you only need to convert back to $250,000 to Canadian dollars, then hey, you don't have to hedge the full million. You hedge that part, the stuff that you're basically the profit piece that's exposed to that currency risk. But in general, this sort of thing is frankly, sadly, not discussed enough. And anyone, I guess, unless you get a lot of experience in the FX market in your business, basically seeing how wildly your costs can shift or your revenues can shift, it's not something that's top of mind. So talk to me about when the deals get big enough that it makes sense to enter into these transactions. Are we talking like the $10,000 mark again, or should we be looking at something substantially larger?
So if you're talking about forward contracts, I would recommend it becoming more appealing to you when you're talking about six figures. Minimum, $100,000 is typically the smallest amount we'll do on a forward contract because that's, On $10,000, okay, you lose $500 on a forward is not the end of the world. $100,000, you can lose thousands. On $10 million, you can lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially exposing yourself type of situation. So it can get quite dramatic quite quickly. And it's, you talk about natural hedge, and of course, that's really important. Going back to the bank's high margins. If you're hedging, if you're doing natural hedge, but you're not calculating correctly and you're calculating to buy and sell on both sides of markets, that's a 7-cent swing on hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's just money that's going to the banks for unnecessarily. And again, that's one of the questions I would ask, and a broker myself would ask you: how much U.S. receivables do you have? How much U.S. outgoing do you have? How much do we have to actually exchange it and hedge that type of situation? So we're not over exchanging unnecessarily.
The thing is, too, is that for a lot of people hearing this, they may think this is overly complicated. People not accustomed to finance and derivatives classes, which, by the way, the derivatives course is one of the highest failure rates that there is. But you don't have to be able to calculate all this stuff. I mean, in principle, these contracts are very straightforward for people. It's, hey, I know what price I'm getting, full stop. I can either take that or not take that. End of story. But once you enter into the contract, it's a legal obligation that you have to deliver on, right? So it's definitely something that can be used to eliminate a lot of risk. And anyone who's been in business long enough to have seen Canadian dollar go from 60 cents to $1.20, was it $1.10 or $1.20, right back down to like 70, 80. Like, it's funny. I like to refer to Canada as the slow moving Bitcoin. When people complain about the volatility of Bitcoin, I'm like, have you seen our currency? It may take longer, but I don't think we're known necessarily for stability. That said, it does, going back to the principle of do you lose money, purchasing power parity. Hey, there are periods where we're not there. 60 cents, we were not there. $1.10, we were not there. When we're, looking at that number does change over time, but when we're somewhere around the 80-cent mark, we're pretty damn close. So you're not really losing anything. So yeah, there are times where it's expensive. There are times where it's cheap, but in general, it's not just about how much you get in return. It's about how much you get in return compared to the basket. So Shane, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to explain this concept to people. Hopefully anyone who's listening who can use your services will reach out, because frankly, it's just two things. A, if you're not a business owner, if you're an advisor or whoever it is, and you have clients entering into a large foreign currency transactions, this is a great value add, because, hey, you said basically a spread difference there of almost 2.5%. Like, that is a massive savings on large amounts. And then if you're a business owner, this is something that basically can save your profitability altogether. Any parting words of wisdom on this? Yeah,
I mean, just kind of, we were trained, I guess, from early age to use your banks for all your banking needs. And someone like yourself, financial advisor, who clearly is so specialized and cares about their clients. We're kind of the same model. You think outside the bank, there are much better options of people who actually care about you. They're not making billions of dollars off your back. And have the call. Look what the options are. It's not just about the rates. Yes, it's going to save you money. Also services, again, going above and beyond, giving that personal touch to make sure that your needs are being met. Fees, wire fees. Why pay $50 at the bank for a wire fee when you don't have to? When you have a company like myself who can do domestic and international wire fees for nominal fees or even free.
Well, you know why they charge those? So this is a funny thing to interject. So those systems those systems are old and clunky, right? So they require labor hours now. So they charge fees for those. But the problem is that while they automated away a lot of those inefficiencies, they still charge those fees because they become a major profit center. Whereas companies like yours who recognize that, hey, this is not super complicated, we can do this pretty affordably, you're not trying to maintain these ridiculously fat margins off of that.
Absolutely correct. Yes, that nails it pin in the head. They've done a good job of making it efficient, but that doesn't mean they're going to make it any cheaper for the consumer. So,
well, we're not a competitive market in this country. We all know that. Although some people argue with me on Twitter that it's okay that way. I don't get it. And why not have one bank? I don't understand why we need five. So Shane, where can people find you?
Well, so my company's Firma Foreign Exchange. My email address, hopefully maybe put a link there, but it'd be Shane.Slater. That's SHANE. Slater, SLATER at FirmaFX.com. That's FIRMAFX.com. Or if you want to ever give me a call, the office number is 416-363-1583, and just ask for Shane.
Thank you, Shane. Very much appreciated.
It was an awesome conversation, Jason, and have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening yet again to Financial Planning for Canadian Business Owners. I know the release schedule of these episodes has not been as consistent as my other podcasts, but that's because it's harder to find good topics here. So if you are a listener who has a business-specific topic that you would like to hear about, please let me know. I can always find someone to bring in the show to have an in-depth conversation on. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals, business owners, and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca. You can even ask Siri, Alexa, or Google Home to subscribe for you.